Her silence is not the absence of feeling. In most cases, it is the loudest expression of it, and the men who understand why are the ones who never lose her permanently. There are 7 specific psychological reasons why a woman who still has genuine feelings for someone goes completely silent, and understanding even one of them will reframe every confusing interaction you've had with someone you genuinely cared about. One of them involves a protection mechanism so deeply wired into the female nervous system that it activates automatically, without her conscious permission. Another involves a Stoic principle that Marcus Aurelius wrote about directly, one that applies to human silence in ways nobody has connected before. And the climax of this video contains a truth about silence and love that most men spend their entire lives never understanding. Stay with me. Here is the honest premise. Silence between 2 people who once had something real is never empty. It is always full of unprocessed feeling, of unresolved questions, of a heart that hasn't finished deciding what it wants to do with everything it's still carrying. The Stoics understood silence differently than most people do. For the Stoics, silence was not absence, it was discipline. The deliberate choice to hold something internally rather than express it prematurely, to process before speaking, to feel before acting. When a woman goes silent after something real existed between you, she is almost always doing something stoic without knowing it. She is holding something internally that she doesn't yet know how to bring into the world. Bold claim, the silence of a woman who still has feelings is almost always self-protection, not indifference. And confusing the two is the most costly mistake available in this situation. Here is the psychology. Attachment research identifies a specific response pattern in people who have experienced significant emotional pain in relationships, sometimes called anxious withdrawal. When the nervous system has been hurt by someone it was deeply invested in, it develops a protective reflex. Before re-engaging, before allowing the feelings to become visible again, it creates distance, not to punish, not to manipulate, to survive. The brain's threat detection system, the amygdala, has logged the previous pain as a genuine threat, and it responds to the possibility of re-exposure to that threat the same way it responds to any threat, with protective withdrawal. Her silence is her nervous system saying, I cannot survive being hurt by this person again. I need to be certain before I open. The painful irony is this: the more she felt, the deeper the original connection, the stronger the protective response. Her silence is often directly proportional to the depth of what she's protecting. Scenario: Marcus and a woman named Ava had ended things 6 months earlier. Not dramatically, not cleanly, but in the ambiguous way that leaves both people unsure what actually happened. Marcus reached out after 4 months. Ava saw the message, read it 3 times, didn't respond for 2 weeks. Her friend asked why. Because if I respond and it goes wrong again, I don't know if I come back from that a second time. She wasn't indifferent. She was terrified. 2 entirely different things. What most men do wrong. They interpret the silence as rejection and either disappear permanently or pursue with increasing anxiety, both of which confirm her nervous system's fear that engaging again is dangerous. What actually works? One warm, pressureless, genuinely patient reach out. Not a demand, not a declaration, something that says, I'm here, no pressure, the door is open. And then, the hardest part, you actually wait, without visible anxiety, without follow-up messages, without making your patience conditional on her timeline. That patience is Stoic practice in its most practical form. Bold claim: many women who are completely silent about genuine feelings are silent for one specific reason. They have no reliable evidence that what they feel is mutual, and without that evidence, speaking first feels like walking off a cliff. The psychology here draws from vulnerability research, particularly Brené Brown's documentation of the vulnerability gap. The vulnerability gap is the painful space between what we feel and what we're willing to express, a space created by the perceived risk of exposure without guarantee of safety. For women specifically, this gap tends to be wider than men expect, because the social consequences of expressing unrequited feeling, the awkwardness, the potential loss of the existing connection, the specific humiliation of wanting someone who doesn't want you back, feel genuinely high, so she waits for a signal clear enough to justify the risk. And if that signal doesn't come, she stays silent, not because she feels nothing, because she feels too much to risk getting it wrong. Mini story. A woman named Zoe had been friends with a man named Daniel for 2 years. The feelings had developed slowly, genuinely, in the way that real things develop, without announcement, without drama, just quietly becoming undeniable. She said nothing for 8 months. Her sister finally asked, "Why don't you just tell him?" Zoe said, "Because if he doesn't feel the same way, I lose the friendship, and I can't afford to lose him. So I'd rather keep him as a friend than risk having neither." She wasn't playing games. She was doing the only math available to her with the information she had. What most men do wrong, they wait for the woman to make the first move because they're also afraid of rejection, creating a mutual silence where both people feel something and neither person speaks. What actually works? Reduce the perceived risk for her, not by declaring everything dramatically, by creating consistent, warm, specific attention, the kind that communicates genuine interest without requiring an immediate response to it. Give her evidence before you ask for anything. Here is a reason most men never consider, and it explains a significant portion of female silence after genuine connection. Bold claim: women process emotional experiences more thoroughly and more slowly than most men expect, and silence during that processing is not withdrawal, it is work. Neuroscience research on emotional processing and memory consolidation shows that the brain requires time to integrate significant emotional experiences, particularly those that involve loss, confusion, or unresolved outcome. This integration process is not passive. It is active neural work. The brain is literally reorganizing its understanding of the experience, its implications, and what they mean for future behavior. During this processing, many women go externally quiet, not because they've stopped feeling, because they are so thoroughly engaged in the internal experience that external expression feels premature. The Stoic parallel here is precise. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the discipline of not acting before understanding. The Stoic practice of journaling, of internal dialogue and reflection before external expression, is essentially the same process. Think before you speak, process before you act, feel before you decide what to do with what you feel. Her silence in this context is Stoic wisdom in action. But here's the part no one tells you. The processing has an endpoint. It doesn't continue indefinitely. At some point, for better or worse, she arrives at clarity. And what happens in your life during the time she's processing determines what she finds clarity about. If you disappear during her processing, if you become unavailable, resentful, or move on visibly, she often arrives at clarity that closing the door is the right move. Not because she stopped feeling, because the available evidence suggested you had. If you remain consistently, warmly, patiently present, without pressure, without demand, she often arrives at clarity that points in a completely different direction. Your behavior during her silence is not irrelevant. It is actively influencing the conclusion of a process you cannot see. Bold claim: some female silence is deliberate, not manipulative, but genuinely evaluative. She is watching what you do when she doesn't give you what you want, and what she observes determines everything. This is the section that requires the most honest self-reflection, because most men fail this particular evaluation without realizing it's happening. The psychology draws from attachment theory's concept of secure base testing. Before a person with an anxious or fearful attachment history allows themselves to fully invest in someone, they often, unconsciously, create situations that reveal whether the other person can remain stable under pressure, whether they regulate their own emotions, whether they become needy, aggressive, or cold when comfort is withheld. Her silence is the test environment. Your behavior inside that silence is your answer. Mini story. A man named Kevin had been seeing a woman named Priya for 3 months when she suddenly went much quieter, less responsive, less available. Kevin, genuinely confused, started texting more frequently, then called when she didn't respond, then sent a long message asking what he had done wrong. Priya's friend asked her about it. "He completely fell apart," she said. "I just needed some space to think, and he couldn't handle 2 days of quiet without making it a crisis. That told me everything I needed to know about whether I could rely on him when things got actually difficult." Kevin hadn't done anything wrong in the traditional sense. He had simply revealed, under mild uncertainty, that his emotional stability was dependent on her consistent reassurance. And that revelation cost him the relationship more thoroughly than any specific mistake could have. What most men do wrong, they pursue anxiously, which confirms the worst fear, that this man will be a source of emotional labor rather than emotional safety. What actually works? The Stoic response: stability, warmth without desperation, one genuine, pressureless reach out, then actual return to your own life. Not performed, but genuine. Let her observe, through your behavior, that you are someone who can hold himself together when circumstances are uncertain. That is the quality she was testing for. Demonstrate it not through words, but through actual behavior. This is one of the most emotionally honest reasons on this list, and the one that requires the most compassion to understand. Bold claim: when a woman goes silent after something ends or changes, she is often not processing the present reality. She is grieving a future that she had already begun to imagine, and grief requires silence the way healing requires rest. Grief psychology, particularly the work of Pauline Boss on ambiguous loss, documents that losses without clear endings are among the most difficult to process. When a relationship ends ambiguously, or when connection changes in ways that are neither fully resolved nor fully concluded, the grieving person has no clear closure point to orient around. She is mourning something that hasn't officially ended, grieving a person who is still present, processing the loss of a future she had already begun to build internally. That specific kind of grief is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't produce dramatic scenes or explicit declarations. It produces withdrawal, the natural human response to pain that doesn't yet have a name. Scenario: Elena and a man named James had been building something for 8 months. Not formally defined, but genuinely significant to both of them. When James pulled back, not ending things explicitly, just becoming less available, Elena went silent. She wasn't playing games, she was grieving. She had already imagined introducing him to her family, already thought about what the next year might look like with him in it, already made room for him in the future she was building. When that future became uncertain, she didn't know how to talk about it, so she went quiet with it instead. What most men do wrong, they interpret the withdrawal as her moving on and use it as permission to do the same, when she was actually waiting for him to notice what his pulling back had produced. What actually works? Gentle acknowledgement, not dramatic processing, just a quiet, honest, "I feel like something shifted between us and I want to understand it better. I'm not going anywhere." That sentence, said genuinely, gives her something to grieve with rather than alone. Bold claim: pride and love are not opposites. In many women, pride is the guardian of love, the part that refuses to let love become visible until safety is established. And understanding this distinction changes everything. The Stoics had a precise understanding of pride. They distinguished between vanity, the performance of self-worth for external validation, and genuine dignity, the internal maintenance of self-respect regardless of external circumstances. When a woman goes silent because of pride, she is almost always expressing the second kind. She has genuine self-respect. She has been in situations before where she expressed feeling and was not met with equal investment. And she has made an internal commitment, conscious or not to put herself in that position again without sufficient evidence of safety. This is not manipulation. This is dignity, and it deserves to be recognized as such. Mini story. A woman named Sophia had told a man named Nathan how she felt about him 18 months earlier. He had responded warmly but non-committally, not rejecting her, not accepting her, but leaving everything unresolved in the way that costs the person who spoke most. When they reconnected a year later, Sophia felt the same things, immediately, undeniably, and said absolutely nothing. Her friend was frustrated. "Just tell him again," Sophia said. "I told him once. If he wants to know how I feel, he has enough information to ask. I'm not putting myself out there again without some indication that this time will be different." That is not game playing. That is a woman who respects herself enough to require evidence before making herself vulnerable a second time. What most men do wrong, they interpret the silence as disinterest and never ask. Never create the safety that would allow her to speak. Both people end up losing something real because neither was brave enough to go first. What actually works? Be the one who goes first, not with a declaration that puts all the pressure on her. With an honest, specific acknowledgement. I think about what was between us. I don't want to assume anything, but I want you to know I'm not indifferent to it. That sentence does something specific. It creates safety without demanding response. It tells her that speaking won't be met with silence. That going first this time carries less risk than it did before. This is the truth reveal. The deepest psychological insight in this entire video. Bold claim, the most painful and most misread female silence is the one that comes not from indifference, not from self-protection, not from grief, but from a woman who has already decided she still wants you and is terrified of that decision. Here is the truth that most men never get to. When genuine feeling survives difficulty, when attraction and connection persist through endings and distance and time, it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a fact. Something she didn't decide, something she simply is. And facts that we didn't choose and can't control are frightening, particularly when the object of that feeling has hurt us before, or when the circumstances are complicated, or when everything logical says the feeling should have faded by now, and somehow it hasn't. She goes silent not because she decided against you, but because she decided for you, and that decision terrifies her. The Stoics had a name for this kind of internal conflict. They called it akrasia, the state of acting or feeling against one's own better judgment, of knowing what you should want and finding that what you actually want is something different, something larger, something that doesn't fit neatly into what reason recommends. Epictetus wrote about accepting what cannot be controlled, including the contents of one's own heart. The woman who is silent because she has already decided she still loves you is wrestling with exactly this. She cannot control what she feels. She can only control whether she says it, and so she says nothing, because saying it makes it real, and real things can be lost. Mini story. A woman named Clara had ended things with a man named Thomas 14 months earlier. The relationship had been real, deeply, genuinely real, but the timing had been wrong. She had needed to focus on herself. He had needed to grow. They had both known it. She thought about him almost every day. Not obsessively, not painfully, just he was there, in the background of her thoughts. Present in the way that things we genuinely love are always present. She said nothing. Her therapist finally asked, "What would happen if you told him?" Clara was quiet for a long time. "I think he might still feel the same way, and that's what scares me most. Not rejection, reciprocation. Because reciprocation meant trying again, and trying again meant risking losing again, and losing again, now with this much more at stake, felt unsurvivable. That is the deepest silence, the one that comes from a woman who has already decided, and is sitting with the weight of that decision alone because she doesn't yet have the courage or the safety to let it become a conversation. The Stoic response to this, for both people, is Marcus Aurelius's most repeated instruction: act, not reactively, not impulsively, but deliberately, intentionally, with full awareness of what is being risked and full acceptance of what might result. The Stoics did not believe in paralysis. They believed in deliberate action from a place of genuine values. If you feel something real, if you believe she does too, if the silence between you is full rather than empty, the Stoic move is not to wait indefinitely for certainty that never comes. It is to speak, honestly, once, without demand, without pressure, and then, regardless of what follows, to have the dignity and the peace of knowing you said the true thing when it mattered. Because the deepest regret available in human relationship is not rejection, it is silence. The silence of two people who both felt something real and neither found the courage to say it before the moment passed. Don't be the man who lives in that silence. Here is the question I want to leave you with tonight. Is there someone in your life whose silence you have been misreading as indifference when it might actually be the most honest expression of feeling available to her right now? And if there is, what are you going to do with that? Not tomorrow, not when the timing is perfect, not when you feel completely certain. What are you going to do with it now? Because the moment you're waiting for, the moment where everything is clear and safe and guaranteed, that moment does not exist. It never has. The Stoics understood this completely. All that exists is now. This conversation, this person, this feeling that hasn't gone away no matter how much time has passed. The silence between you is not permanent, but it will become permanent if neither of you chooses to break it. Drop in the comments, have you ever misread someone's silence, only to find out later they were still feeling everything? Tell me what happened, and if today gave you something real to sit with, subscribe. Every week we bring this level of honesty and psychological depth to the questions that actually matter. See you in the next one.